Have a special guest, Dr. Zivadinovic from Weimar University, and we're going to talk about some of his research and information on the Sabbath in the early church. So let me know in the chat if there's any echoing or you're not hearing me or anything. Let me know. And I'm going to share my screen and hand it over to Dr. Z. Let's see here. All right. Let me. Okay, yeah, there's no sound. Let me see if I can fix that. Let's see. Okay, yeah, there's no sound. Let me see if I can fix that. Let's see if that's working now. Did you hear me asking? I hear you, but I'm thinking it's not it's not working on the thing. No. Did you hear me asking? I hear you, but I'm yeah, now I think it's working. So remember the 7 days to keep it holy. Some Christians say that particular commandment is abolished, and they don't really have any biblical statement where Jesus comes and says, okay, we are done with that, or we don't have to do circumcision anymore. Circumcision we have statements in the New Testament where, okay, this was a type, this was a figure, this was a shadow, this was a picture of something greater. Sacrifices, we have that in the New Testament. Those were shadows of Christ's sacrifice for us, temple services, and all those things in the Old Testament. But the fourth commandment, which is part of the 10 Commandments, we know that doesn't even begin at Sinai with Moses. I mean, it was given in the Garden of Eden before sin. And so that's the only part of the 10 Commandments that is even mentioned in the Garden of Eden. And so this seems to be an important memorial of God's creation, 7-day Sabbath. And so this has always been by many in the Christian world. For some reason, they are so desirous of abolishing this commandment. They have such a great desire to just abolish Saturday or just not have any day of rest, or now to push them to have another day of rest, Sunday, not Monday, not Tuesday, not Friday, but they really want the Sunday. And so, I mean, there has been discussion this Sunday because Jesus resurrected on the Sunday, but nowhere in the New Testament do we have a statement from any of the apostles saying Jesus resurrected on Sunday, therefore we're changing the day of rest. If anything, the fact that Jesus died on Friday, rested on Saturday, and then went to work again to intercede for us and for humanity on Sunday should actually teach us that Sunday is a work day. And the Saturday, it was the rest day. Jesus, even in his redemption work, rested on the Saturday. God rested in his creation work on Saturday Sabbath. And in his redemption work, God will rest on Saturday Sabbath. And so we don't have any scripture pointing to the change of the day of rest just because Jesus resurrected on Sunday. This is not, of course, Christian assumption. Christians say, well, we want to do Sunday because Jesus resurrected. Well, Jesus died on Friday. Isn't Jesus' death on the cross for us monumental and the most important thing? So we should maybe celebrate Friday. Anyway, so there's nothing in the scripture. So, but the argument has been often going, well, in the early church. So now this is not a scriptural argument. This is now a historical argument. Well, the early church has switched to Sunday very quickly after the apostles. Now, is that true? Even if this were to be true, this is still not a scriptural argument. So we want to investigate what is the truth when it comes to Saturday Sabbath. Now, the argument has been that since Jesus resurrected on the Sunday, the Christians just understood that somehow to be a change of the day of rest, of Shabbat. It's not anymore on the 7-day Sabbath. Now it's on the first day of the week on Sunday. So somehow, because there has been some arguments that but some of the apostles met on Sunday. We have one instance perhaps of Paul preaching and traveling, and he came to a church and it happened to be on the first day of the week, which actually proves that this was a day for travel, because he traveled to this church on that day, and he came Sunday evening, and he had a service on Sunday evening. It's actually Sunday evening is already Monday, so it's not even Sunday keeping. And then, so some people say, hey, here, Paul, this is the first day of the week, and Paul was preaching in this church. It doesn't mean that Sunday is a day of rest. This is in Acts chapter 20. It just means that actually Sunday was a day where he was able to travel to get to this church, and then he was just traveling to so many different places, and he would sometimes stay a day or two in a certain place, and then he would meet with the church, whether that would be a Sunday or Monday or Tuesday. It doesn't matter. People wanted to hear Paul, even especially if he was there for a short period of time. But we have in Acts chapter 13, verse 42 and 43, we have evidence where Paul, when he's staying at certain places, in Ephesus particularly, or Galatians, where he stayed at a certain place, he would come on 7-day Sabbath and preach to the Jews, and then the Gentiles wanted to hear Apostle Paul preach, and Apostle Paul said, come next Sabbath, which makes no sense if Paul understood that Sunday is specific day of rest or day of worship or something like that. He would invite them the next day. Now, worshiping is not limited to a 7-day Sabbath, of course. Worshiping people, you can worship every day. Early church gathered every day to have a prayer meeting, to have a midweek vespers, to have a Friday evening beginning of the Sabbath. You can worship God and go to church any day. We're talking about abstaining from work and respecting God and believing that God will provide for you, even though you are not working, you are not providing for yourself. You have faith that God will provide. It's actually 7-day Sabbath is an exercise of faith. It's probably the only commandment that teaches us righteousness by faith, which is very ironic because when you're trying to observe 7-day Sabbath, people accuse you of being legalist, and it's the only commandment where you actually refrain from work. Legalism is work.
Yeah.
Legalism, you're trying to provide for your own life, for your own sustenance by working, by doing something by your own effort and strength. And Sabbath is like, no, stop, pause, don't study for your test, don't work for your family, just pause. And you're like, okay, so you need to have faith and not works. And so Sabbath is actually much deeper than just resting. It's an exercise of faith in God. And God has appointed that for us and to commemorate the work of creation. Anyhow, so we don't have anything in the New Testament. Now, do we have something in the early church on changing from Saturday to Sunday? We do, but in my research, I was kind of focusing on if the argument that, the early church recognized that 7-day Sabbath should be replaced with Sunday. Now, we don't have evidence of that in the early church. We do not have evidence of that in our church. And I'm going to share this in this paper. Now, we do have evidence that the early church recognized that circumcision and sacrificial laws were abolished. We don't see any mainstream Christianity, any mainstream Christian group, any Christian group in Rome, in Antioch, in Palestine, in Persia, in Syria, in Egypt, in Alexandria, in Carthage. Nowhere do Christians follow circumcision or do they follow ceremonial law. We don't have that. There's some marginal Judaistic Christian sects that still do circumcision, but they're actually marginalized, and even the New Testament writers like Paul talk against them. So we don't have mainstream Christianity arguing or having any issues with circumcision or sacrifices. We don't have that. If 7-day Sabbath was somehow recognized by the early church to be replaced by Sunday, we should see that in the historical record. We should see like majority, 99% of the Christians not keeping the 7-day Sabbath, but actually opposite is the true. Actually, it was the minority that did Sunday. We'll talk about that right now. So what my research actually centered on Sabbath in the East, because originally I thought that Christians in the East and Christians in the Latin West disagreed over this issue of Sabbath versus Sunday. But eventually I realized that even many Christians in the West were Sabbath keepers. And so let me show you through that research that Sunday was actually a minority view, and it grew little by little until politically Sunday was pushed into being a majority view. And so I want to show that research a little bit.
Great.
So I started with looking at Sabbath in the East, but first, in the first part of my research, I was looking at early Sunday introduction. So in this paper I'm presenting, I can read a little bit. The first part of the 2nd century witnessed a significant separation between Jews and Christians. Before 100 AD, the majority of Christians were of Jewish origin, They often held worship services in synagogues. They respected some Jewish food ordinances, such as kosher eating. We can see that in Acts chapter 15, verse 20, where early church, this is New Testament church, it's not Jewish dispensation, this is Christianity, where they're actually prescribing not to eat blood, not to eat strangled animals and things like that. So there are some, these are some hygienic laws from the Old Testament that the New Testament church says, yeah, this still makes sense. These are not sacrificial laws. These are just hygiene. You don't eat meat with blood because that's where most of the diseases reside. And so we have evidence of Christians still respecting food eating of the Jewish tradition and Jewish law in the Old Testament. And so, in summary, Christians were generally seen as another Jewish sect. However, around the end of the first century, there was a strong separation between Jews and Christians for several reasons. One of the reasons was that more and more Christians began to be from Gentile origin, so they're not Jews anymore. So they're mostly Greek. And so more and more, they're not even ethnically Jewish, and the Jews kind of don't see them as Jewish because they're respecting some Jewish Old Testament laws, but they're still not. They believe in Jesus, the Messiah, and so there has been this division between Jews and Christians. Now, one of the strong division factors was the persecution of the Jews. First, it was the Jews themselves. They often tried to portray Christians as instigators to the Roman officials, and Christians were persecuted in different places. But many Christians would still consider themselves as a Jewish group. But around the early 2nd century, we're seeing a big shift. And this is the time when the Jews, they decided to rebel and revolt against Rome for the second time. Now, remember, the Jews revolted against the Roman Empire 2 times. Once in 70 AD, and another major time was 135 AD during the Emperor Hadrian. And both times, Jerusalem has been destroyed to the ground. And 1 million Jews have been massacred in AD 70, and nearly another million in 135 AD. Now, the Jews believe that they were trying to produce a Messiah. We don't know if this was maybe a reaction to Jesus. A lot of Jews became Christians and claiming the Messiah has already come. And the Jews, the Romans came and destroyed the temple in AD 70, kind of showing God's displeasure with the Jews killing Jesus. And so that was, the Jews did not want to accept that. So they said, no, Jesus Christ was not the Messiah. We are still God's people. We're waiting for a Messiah that will destroy the Romans. And so there was a fake Messiah called Simon Bar Kokhba. And he instigated the Jews against the Roman state. And there was a huge revolt of the Jews in 135 AD. Now, the Romans were so disgusted with the Jews because the Jews kept revolting so many times that they destroyed Jerusalem for a second time. And this time, this is very interesting, following the destruction of Jerusalem by Emperor Hadrian in AD 135, many Jews were exiled, and an official Roman edict was issued prohibiting Jewish customs, specifically including the observance and congregation on the 7-day Sabbath throughout the empire. This was the first anti-Sabbath law in the Roman times, in the Roman Empire. And this is Hadrian, Emperor Hadrian, 135 AD. Now, this meant that nobody can congregate on 7-day Sabbath, whether Jewish, pagan, Christian. 7-day Sabbath was prohibited from congregation, and this prohibition lasted for about 30, 40 years until Roman emperors stopped enforcing this. Now, why would they force a Saturday Sabbath ban? Because the Jews would often meet in the synagogues on the 7-day Sabbath, pretending to have worship, and the men would discuss revolt in the background of the synagogue. So that has been reported to the Roman authorities, that it has been repeatedly the case. And so Hadrian just prohibited any 7-day Sabbath gathering whatsoever. Now this is kind of crazy, because I guess, and Jews could not gather anytime, but specifically 7-day Sabbath. So what are you going to do? If you're a Christian, now remember, Christian at that time, we're going to see evidence that many Christians, they still keep 7-day Sabbath at that time. There was still no universal recognition that somehow Sunday has become a day of rest instead of 7-day Sabbath. We don't have that. So, but seeking to avoid persecution, some Christian groups try to distinguish themselves from Judaism, emphasizing various religious differences between Jews and Christians. We have evidence of that. And then the spirit of separation was particularly felt in Rome, because in Rome, the Jews were numerous, and the persecution was more severe. So there's two big cities in the Roman Empire, Rome and Alexandria. Those two big cities contain most of the Roman military that was not actively serving on the border. And so you had Rome and you had Alexandria. Those two are places where you have Roman military, and if there is breaking of Roman laws, those two cities would enforce compliance the most. And so it's exactly specifically in those two cities, Rome and Alexandria, where Sunday keeping begins occurring in the 2nd century. Okay, here is a historian, Bruce Metzger. He's a famous New Testament scholar and historian. He says, in the West, particularly after the Jewish rebellion under Hadrian, it became vitally important for those who were not Jews to avoid exposing themselves to suspicion, and the observance of Sabbath was one of the most noticeable indications of Judaism. In the East, however, less opposition was shown to Jewish institutions. So Bruce Metzger says in his book, this is in Studies in Lectionary Text of the Greek New Testament, Volume 2, he says that in the East, so in Asia Minor, in Syria, in Palestine, the Christians, they continued keeping he calls it Jewish institution, but it's actually a biblical institution, like a Sabbath, because there was not so much of persecution. But in Rome, in the West, Rome and Alexandria, it became vitally important for those who were not Jews to avoid exposing themselves to suspicion. So many Christians started shifting to another day. Another issue was that there was this push to distance themselves from Judaism, from Christians. And so in that desire to distance themselves from Judaism, some Christians went too far and abandoned 7-day Sabbath, specifically in, guess where? Rome and Alexandria. The very first writing was the Epistle of Pseudo-Barnabas, and so written around 135 in Alexandria. This unknown author, under the pseudonym of Barnabas, developed a thesis that the 7-day Sabbath is and has always been, in fact, merely a symbol of the final millennium of peace. Okay, so this author, Barnabas, he claims to be the Barnabas of the friend of Apostle Paul, but most Christians at that time, well, some Christians, and then today, scholarly consensus is very clear that this is not a real Barnabas. And so somebody was falsely alleging the name Barnabas, ascribing to this document a false name. And so as soon as you start claiming false name under your document, it's very morally suspicious because it's called bearing false witness. It's lying. So there's a lying document claiming to be Barnabas, and he is introducing a new theology. He's introducing that Sabbath. There's not just that. Pseudo Barnabas, he's trying to, this writer, Pseudo Barnabas, writing from Alexandria, you can see that he is trying to communicate with the Gnostics. And the Gnostics, they really hated the Old Testament because Old Testament had so much Jewish ordinances, like you can't eat the pork, you can't eat the hare or the rabbit, like you can't eat shellfish, don't touch dead carcass. And there's a lot of ritual laws in the Old Testament. And so many Gnostics were laughing and saying, ha, 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 this is such a ridiculous Jewish book. We don't want to be, this Christianity is so ridiculous. And so Pseudo Barnabas is saying, wait. No, the Old Testament is not that bad, but you misunderstood the Old Testament. You're supposed to understand it allegorically. So he allegorizes everything. This Pseudo Barnabas allegorizes. He says, no. When God told the Jews to not eat the pork, what God really meant is don't be fat. Or if God says don't eat the rabbit, it means don't fornicate like rabbits. That's what it means. Or like when God says don't have sex during menstruation period with your wife, what that means is something else. Like he would allegorize and make up stuff. Like the whole book is all about allegorizing and making stuff up. And so he does that to the 7-day Sabbath also. He said, oh no, God never wanted the Jews to rest in the 7-day Sabbath. No matter that God actually specifically communicates that in the fourth commandment. And also in Isaiah chapter 58, God says, if you keep your foot away from the Sabbath, from my holy day, you shall be blessed on the earth. Never mind. So Pseudo Barnabas said, no, this is just this means that after 6,000 years of sin, there's going to be a 7th millennium of peace in the future. That's what Sabbath really is. And so it's very convoluted. And then he actually says he admonishes Christians to keep the 8th day. So that's kind of weird, because if Sabbath is allegorical of something, why are you keeping anything? So this Pseudo Barnabas says that they should keep the 8th day. Now this terminology, 8th day, is an interesting terminology. It comes from paganism. And so we can see that this pseudo-epigraphical, allegorical nature of Pseudo Barnabas' epistle and its usage of terms such as gnosis. He says we need to have a real gnosis and we need to worship or rest on the 8th day. The terminology suggests a Platonic Gnostic influence, which was very, very prevalent in cities such as Alexandria, from where this epistle originates. Now you have to understand, just because you have one author in the 2nd century who makes some allegorical crazy statements and then he says that we should worship on Sunday, that doesn't mean that other 5 million Christians all over the world are all now worshiping on Sunday. This is just one person, and this is just one case. Okay, that's important to show. We're going to show that you have to, when you're looking at early church, it's very important to see the whole puzzle. And so I'm presenting I'm presenting like where are some Sunday keeping, where how did that start creeping in? And then I'm going to show you the Sabbath was like prevalent in many different places. So it wasn't just so the picture is not just one. It's not, you can't just read one early church document and say, haha, everybody thinks the same. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have this terminology of the 8th day. And the 8th day is kind of like some type of allegorical way of saying a day after Sabbath, because Sabbath is the 7th day. So 8th day is confirmed by the early church father Irenaeus in AD 170, who reports that the Gnostic heretics believed that the spirit of man was formed on the 8th day. So the Gnostics hated creation. You see, that you have to understand there was this huge fake Christian, or not, but kind of like a pagan, Platonic, New Age Christianity movement that was trying to push itself within Christianity. And it has succeeded in some churches. So this Gnosticism actually was a belief that they shared a Platonic, Greek Platonic idea that our bodies are just prisons for imprisoned souls. So the Plato said that, the soul, suke, the soul's psyche, they used to live in heaven. It was all beautiful. And then they sinned against Monads, the god. And so these souls came into the bodies of humans, and these suke souls came to the bodies of humans, and now they're here living in our bodies like a prison, trying to pay for their sins. And so the Gnostics hated material world, because material world was a punishment, was a prison to the spiritual souls. So that's why they hated the 7-day Sabbath. Gnostics hated the Sabbath because 7-day Sabbath reminded us of creation, this material creation. And so, when Christians would say, hey, yeah, we keep 7-day Sabbath because God created, man in the 6th day, and the 7th day he rested, the Gnostics came up with this, oh, yes, well, God formed the spirit of man on the 8th day, like as if a man was spiritless on the 6th day, and on the 7th day he was spiritless, and then on the 8th day, like on Sunday, he got a spirit. So Gnostics came up with this idea of 8th day. This was a very Gnostic idea. So as soon as I see Pseudo Barnabas advocating for, like, he doesn't say let's worship on the 1st day. He says 8th day. I can see Gnostic terminology speaking through this guy. Okay, so we can see that's a Gnostic infiltration. Mm-hmm. Now, we have this terminology of the 8th day, not just in Irenaeus of Lyon, who tells us about Gnostics, but here there's more. According to Victorinus, Bishop of Puertovio, in 217 AD, he wrote a commentary on Revelation. The idea of the, quote, 8th day was essential for Nicolaitans, an early Gnostic group condemned even by the Bible. Revelation chapter 2, verse 6 condemns the Nicolaitans. The Bible condemns Nicolaitans. Well, who are the Nicolaitans? Well, early church father Victorinus, he gives us, this group existed in the early church. So we have early church father tell us the Nicolaitan Gnostics, who believe that one could commit any sin, such as idolatry or immorality, and be freely forgiven on the, quote, 8th day. So you can read this here. It says that whoever should have committed fornication might receive peace on the 8th day. So again, 8th day is associated with Gnosticism. It's a mystical day where you receive forgiveness, even if you're immorality. You just by going to church on the 8th day, somehow sacramentally you receive forgiveness. Okay, so we can see that Gnosticism, this is a Gnostic influence. The Sunday is actually coming from Gnosticism. Okay, now we have another one, Gnostic leader, Bardesanes the Syrian. He's one of the main Gnostic leaders in the 2nd century. We have some of his books, actually. They survived somehow. He confirms that the Gnostics congregated explicitly on Sunday rather than Sabbath. And here's a quote. On one day, the first of the week, we assemble ourselves together, and on the days of the readings, we abstain from taking sustenance. Okay, so which day do they congregate? the first of the week. So the Gnostics always congregated on the Sunday. The Gnostics despised the Sabbath because in Jewish scriptures, the Sabbath is a memorial of the physical creation of the world. For the Gnostics, the material creation was evil. By the way, the Gnostics believed that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was a good character because it gave knowledge to Adam and Eve. Never mind, it gave knowledge of evil and corruption, but it gave knowledge, but nevertheless. And they believed that it was good because Adam and Eve were trapped in this beautiful prison. Material world is just a trap, it's just an illusion, no matter how beautiful it was in Garden of Eden. So the serpent came and saved Adam and Eve from this wonderful illusion, from this matrix, whatever. And so the serpent kind of saved. And so they liked the serpent, which is Satan really, but they liked it. They flipped everything around. God of the Old Testament, who created the beautiful Garden of Eden and man and woman in this world. No, that's an evil God. He just wants to keep us in the physical world. We want to escape, we want to die, and want to go to heaven. Like our souls need to go into heaven without the bodies. That's why Gnostics hated resurrection concept. That's why they didn't believe Jesus resurrected in the flesh. They thought Jesus was just a ghost. They also believed Jesus wasn't real. They thought Jesus was a phantom because God is so beautiful and good. And Jesus, like a logos, the word of God, he couldn't just be in the flesh because flesh is evil. Why would Jesus be in the flesh? Flesh is just a punishment and like a prison for sin. And so they were saying that Jesus just looked like a man, but he wasn't really a man.
So did they not associate Jesus with Yahweh, and they consider Yahweh evil?
Yahweh was like a lower god, for them. Yahweh was Yalbadot. They call it Yalbadot, which is kind of like a god of the Old Testament. And then there was like a good monad god who is like the real God somewhere in heaven, and he's like really, really far away. But Jesus is like a bridge, and Jesus is like a good logos. It's like a good God. Actually, they believe Jesus was like a feminine principle. He was like kind of like a wisdom. Sophia is like a feminine principle. They had all of these weird ideas. They had women pastors, and they would ordain women because they believe women should also be the leaders. So they made up that Jesus was a feminine principle and God was a masculine. So you have to have both. So this was Gnosticism. Pretty much all the heresies in modern church today, they originate from Gnosticism. By the way, we can talk about Gnosticism for a long time. Gnostics, they would speak in tongues. They would speak in tongues. Like they were like, Marcus the Gnostic from here. You can read Irenaeus against heresies. Gnostics did transubstantiation. They would do magic, and they would, like the cup of water, they would pour something in the water and they would turn red, and they would say, haha, I see, I changed the substance of the water into the grace of God. Drink and you'll receive immortality. So they pretty much originated with Catholic transubstantiation. They originated with Sunday, as you can see. And basically, anyways, so it's a very large topic, this Gnosticism, yeah. But Sabbath was rejected by the Gnostics, and preference was given to the day of the sun, or as they call it, the 8th day. The 8th day was called Ogduat. Now you can see the reverence toward Day of the Sun in the Gnostic work on the origin of the world. Also, the Coptic library, the church historian Neander wrote, the Gnostics celebrated the Sunday of every week, not on account of its reference to the resurrection of Christ, but as the day consecrates the sun, which is in fact their Christ. This is what Neander says. So they like Sunday for different reasons. And so the 8th day was also called the Ogdoad. And so the Ogdoad was contemplated in Greek Pythagorean mysteries, from where such thought entered into Gnostic Judeo-Christian worship. Anyhow, so this hyper-allegorical hermeneutics and the usage of the Gnostic terminology in the Epistles of Barnabas reveal an attempt to reach the Gnostic audience by downplaying the historical meaning of the Old Testament scripture. You can see here, for Alexandria being the hub of Gnosticism, interacting with Christian thought, see Roloff on the Broke, studies in Gnosticism, and so Many Christians in the 2nd and 3rd century have accepted the epistle. Now, this is a crazy thing. In Alexandria was a big hub of Christianity and Judaism, and Alexandria was a big hub, and many cities around Alexandria. So basically, the entire northern Africa, many Christians thought this was the real Barnabas. And so, for about 150 years, maybe 200 years, there was a debate whether this was a really a real Barnabas writing to us, or this is not real Barnabas. Eventually, Christians kind of realized, no, this is a fake guy. This is a fake Barnabas. But in the process, many accepted this as a genuine epistle written by Apostle Barnabas. Today, no scholar believes it was a original Barnabas. It was written 100 years after Barnabas. But some early Christians believed that, and so this Sunday idea entered Christianity through a fake letter. This is going to be you're going to see a silver lining. There's going to be repetition. There's going to be a lot of fake letters from different writers claiming Sunday. So this is not going to be the first one. Kind of interesting. So
do you mean do you think this was one of the first ones that propagated the idea, but not the only?
It's just interesting to me that you infiltrate this heretical thought through fake scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just once. For example, Sabbath keeping continued. We're going to talk about, I don't know if we have if we have time, but if we have time, we'll come to the Christians in Ireland and Celtic Christians in Scotland. And they did not want to give up 7-day Sabbath until like 12th century. And so in the 12th century, you had to have like letters from Rome, where the Roman bishops and the Catholics, they're sending letters to Scotland, and with the Roman missionaries saying, we found a letter on the altar of Peter in Jerusalem, and the letter fell from heaven.
Oh, yeah.
That if you keep Saturday, God, I will destroy your fields, and you need to venerate my mother Mary, and you have to worship on Sunday. Otherwise, I'm going to throw hail and fire on you from heaven. And this letter came down from heaven, supposedly. So there has been several fake letters like that throughout Middle Ages, trying to scare people into Sunday keeping. So this is a trend. You're going to see that trend. It starts very early in the 2nd century. Anyways, just like the serpent starts with the lie. It says, you shall not die, you shall be like gods in the Garden of Eden. And then boom, all of a sudden we buy the lie and we enter this cycle. And the same thing happened in early Christianity with Saturday Sabbath. Okay, so this epistle of Barnabas wielded great influence in swaying some Christians toward rejection of the 7-day Sabbath. Now, you can read more on this. I have a lot of footnotes. For Gnostic influence in Rome upon the congregation, Justin Martyr, see Aesio Cairus, Gnostic Roots of Sunday Keeping in Journal of Adventist Theological Society, spring 2002, has an excellent article just showing how Gnostic influence in Rome was so strong, where the Gnostics basically kind of hijacked the church in Rome in the 2nd century. And there was especially a very influential person called Marcion. I'm going to mention him, so I'm going to continue reading. Okay. Apart from Alexandria, the most stringent anti-Sabbath laws during the mid-2nd century were naturally enforced in Rome, the emperor's residence. Rome, both Jews and Christians were prohibited from assembling on the Sabbath. So what are you going to do? So it seems that some Christians saying, well, we can maybe meet on Sunday, why not? And so eventually became a custom. Around that time, many Christians in Rome began gathering on Sunday. We have evidence of Justin Martyr. He died in 165 AD, and he mentions Sunday as a day of gathering in Rome. He also acknowledges that some Christians still gather on the 7-day Sabbath, and he does not believe they're being excluded from salvation. This is in Justin Marr, the Dialogue with Trifle, chapter 47. So, so this is so we're kind of painting the picture. Okay, now, despite the prevalence of anti-Semitism, Roman anti-Sabbath laws, Greek philosophy, and Gnosticism, which influenced certain early Christian communities in Alexandria and Rome, ample evidence exists of persistent Sabbath observance, particularly among the Greek-speaking churches in the East. Okay, let's start with a very well-known document by the name of Didache. So you can Google Didache, you can read Didache on internet. It's a church manual. It has 16 chapters. It's a first-century local church manual from Syria. The authors of the document encourage new believers to distance themselves from the Jews in this way. It says, "But let not your fast be with the hypocrites, for they fast on the 2nd and 5th day of the week. Rather, fast on the 4th day and the preparation day," which was Friday. Okay, so this is an interesting terminology. The Christians in Antioch, they recommend, among many other things, this is like a church manual on what to do in church, how to do in church business, what to believe. And so one chapter, I think this is chapter 8, Didache chapter 8, talks about fasting. And says, don't fast like the Jews. They fast on the 2nd and the 5th day of the week. So on Monday and on Thursday. Rather, he says, let us be different from the Jews so that people don't associate with the Jews. It says, rather fast on the 4th day, which is Wednesday, and the preparation. And so they call it. They don't call it the day of Viernes. Viernes is like a day of, in Roman term, they call it the preparation day. This is a Jewish terminology.
Mm.
And so the term preparation day has been consistently used in the Bible to describe the 6th day of the week, Friday. Matthew 27, Mark 15, Luke 23, John 19. Friday was termed a preparation day because it was a day to clean up the houses and cook so there could be no work on the Sabbath. Exodus 16, Isaiah 58:13. The language of Didache reveals that the Christians in Syria in around 100 AD still believed that Friday was to be a preparation day. What is a day preparation? Preparation for what?
Right.
It's preparation for the 7-day observance. So otherwise you don't need to call it preparation day. And so this terminology shows you that they're still Sabbath keeper. And this is Didache. Didache is like the most earliest Christian document we have after the death of the apostles. Okay. Similar language is used in the Christian document entitled The Martyrdom of Polycarp, which was written around 160 AD. Now, Polycarp was a disciple of John the Apostle, and he was a bishop of Smyrna, and he was martyred for his Christian faith by Roman officials. Polycarp's disciples wrote the book, The Martyrdom of Polycarp, and they wrote, and this is on page 60, 61 of the book, says, on the day of the preparation, at the hour of dinner, there came out pursuers and horsemen, later concluding that Polycarp was killed, quote, on the day of the great Sabbath.
Interesting.
So the use of these two expressions, so great Sabbath, usually Sabbath is, when you say Sabbath, it's always 7 days. It's always Saturday.
This early, probably, right? Anyways, right?
Oh yeah, Sabbath has never been used for Sunday until like 1600s. Only in the 1600s in England did some English Puritans, they start using term Sabbath to refer to Sundays. Sabbath is always Shabbat. It's always Saturday. And Sunday was called either Dies Solis, or eighth day, or the first day, or the day of the sun, or later it was in the second and third centuries, it started being referred to as Day of the Lord,
Right.
Dominical, Day of the Lord. So you never say, when you say Sabbath, it always means Saturday.
This is great.
Okay, so basically, and so why was he killed on the great Sabbath? Usually, if a 7-day Sabbath falls on a Passover or a festival or some kind of other festival, that's then it's called the Great Sabbath. So why are Christians having this vocabulary? Why are they calling Friday the preparation day still? Why are they calling 7-day Sabbath? And then he died on the Great Sabbath. They're obviously still having. So sometimes Easter would fall on the 7-day Sabbath. So Easter can fall on any day.
Do you think? Do you think he's saying something about the 7th-day Sabbath being a particular 7th-day Sabbath? That kind of makes me think of the idea that the way the Passover may have overlapped with the 7th-day Sabbath when Jesus died.
So some festival, we don't know which one specifically in this text, but some other festival. Now the Christians would still keep Jewish festivals, but without sacrifices, and also they would meet on Easter during Passover, or sometimes they would have other, like sometimes they would meet for different other Jewish festivals, but they would disassociate from sacrificial aspect. They would focus on a spiritual aspect of that festival. And so that was in the early Christianity, especially in the East, that has been a habit to still gather on some of the festivals without necessarily claiming that these festivals are a must. You have in Romans chapter 14, Paul says that if you want to meet on some of the Jewish festivals, you can. But again, it's not. These festivals have a spiritual significance and prophetic significance. Anyways, so it was some kind of other festival that happened on that 7-day Sabbath, and so he calls it a Great Sabbath. So the use of these two expressions, day of the preparation and the day of the Great Sabbath, indicates that Christians in Smyrna still observe the 7-day Sabbath, and this Sabbath fell on a festival, so they call it a Great Sabbath. Otherwise, if they are not keeping the Sabbath, they wouldn't be doing that. They wouldn't be calling it a Great Sabbath. Another thing that is interesting with Polycarp, this guy who was killed by the Romans, is that he opposed. There was an opposition there was a dispute between him and the Roman bishops. So you can see the early rift in Christianity. Now, Polycarp is completely a mainstream Christian leader. He's not considered heretical. He's not considered, even Roman Catholics believe that he's a saint today. They celebrate Saint Polycarp, but he is actually recorded opposing the Roman bishop Anicetus in his plans to elevate Sunday as a day on the resurrection Passover. Okay, so this is interesting here. This is interesting. You need to know this in early church history. There was a very early in the 2nd century, there was a rift between the Church of Rome and the Eastern Christians. The Eastern Christians believed that they should celebrate the resurrection of Jesus once a year during Passover. So whenever Jewish Passover happens, Passover, the 2nd day after Passover, like Jesus died on Friday, so he resurrected on Sunday. So sometimes Passover would happen on Monday, sometimes on Tuesday. And so Christians would say, you know what, we just follow Jewish calendar. And when they have Passover, 2 days after Passover, we have Easter. We just celebrate the resurrection of Jesus.
So the issue is the festivals don't land on the same days of is this a quarter-deciman controversy? Is that what this is about? Is that what they call it?
This is quarter-deciman controversy. Yeah, I'm describing that. And so, but the Christians in Rome, they really hated anything that smelled with Judaism. And so as soon as you start to try to follow Jewish calendar and then count off Jewish calendar how to get to the Passover, to the Easter. They're like, no. The Roman Christians like, no, we can't do that. Let's just do it on Sunday. Whatever Jewish, maybe when the Jewish okay, we can maybe count, we can maybe celebrate, or maybe no. They said, let's look at the Roman calendar whenever is a spring equinox. And then the very first Sunday after the spring equinox, boom, let's do Easter then. They're trying to distance themselves from Judaism. And so Polycarp went to Rome, according to Irenaeus, who writes, he's like eyewitness. He lived in 170, 180 AD. And so Polycarp, like 150, 160 AD, he went to Rome and he opposed Anicetus, the Roman bishop. They couldn't agree, and they agreed to disagree, and they started having this division in Christianity on the issue of Easter. Now, fast forward 30 years later, the disciple of Polycarp by the name of Polycrates. So I don't know how to say in English, Polycrates.
I like your way. Your way sounds better.
Right, Polycrates or Polycrates, I don't know, Polycrates maybe. Disciple of Polycarp, I'm going to write here, Polycrates, this guy. He goes to Rome because Bishop Victor, so there's another Roman Bishop Victor. So this is around 190 AD. This is 30 years, 40 years later. Bishop Victor, he gets angry with these Eastern Christians in Asia Minor, which Asia Minor actually was a hub of Christianity. Majority of Christians actually lived there. But he got so offended that they're defying the Roman law of Sunday, Easter, that he actually excommunicated Polycrates and all the Eastern Christians. He claimed that he could somehow get them out of heaven or something. Excommunication. Well, guess what happened? Irenaeus of Lyon, which was like a very powerful missionary and a theologian from France, he objects to that. He goes to Rome and he rebukes Victor. He says, "Are you crazy? Just 30 years ago, your predecessor, Anicetus, just agreed to disagree on this issue, and now you're excommunicating people." And so Victor had to backpedal, and so Victor had to kind of take that back. But you can see already in the 2nd century, the snake character of the Roman bishops. They're already Gnostic. They already went so far into willing to excommunicate the other Christians on this issue. So you have that Victor. Now Victor's not the only. Irenaeus is not the only one. You have Tertullian of Carthage. That was like in 220. He is rebuking other bishops. Like there's Bishop Stephanus, and there's other bishops of Rome who claim to be some kind of leaders of the whole Christianity everywhere. Tertullian is like, no, you're not. Tertullian actually laughs, and he said, "What? Who do you think you are? Some kind of Pontifex Maximus?"
I love it.
Tertullian says, "Are you some kind of Pontifex Maximus? Like a Roman high priest he has to control him. You think you're some kind of Pontifex Maximus?" Tertullian laughs at Stephanus. Little did he know that 200 years later, the Roman bishops would take that very title on themselves, claiming to be Pontifex Maximus, which means great bridge builder.
Man, I only know of one.
Because great bridge maker is Jesus, but they call themselves great bridge maker between heaven and earth. And this was the title of the Roman priest of Jupiter, and also the title of the Roman emperor. And so, anyways, but you can see already in the early 2nd century, early 3rd century, that the Roman bishops are going wild. There's another Hippolytus. Hippolytus was like one of the most influential doctors, theologians, and preachers in the 3rd century. He lived around 238. He actually rebukes the Roman bishop, he even comes to Rome and he sets up a rival church at Rome, saying Roman church has totally gone crazy. It became super liberal. They're like people like if they reject faith, they can come back to church without rebaptism. Roman bishops believe in modalism, that Jesus and God the Father is the same person. There was modalism, so there was no Trinity. The Roman bishops were heretical in the 3rd century, and other Christians, like major Christian writers, Tertullian, Hippolytus, they all fought against the Roman bishops. Anyways, the Roman bishops did not have wide acceptance, only in the West, because the Roman bishops were the leaders in the West. But when Constantine came around 312 AD, he became promoter of the Roman brand of Christianity, and then he enforced the Roman brand of Christianity onto the rest of the empire, and that's when Roman liturgy and Roman ideas and Sunday. Hippolytus also rebuked the Roman bishops for fasting on Sabbath. Okay, we're going to come to that. So I'm kind of going ahead of myself right now. Okay. So you can kind of see the rift already in the late 2nd century, early 3rd century. There's a rift between Rome and the rest of Christianity. Okay, so that's what people don't understand when they're like looking at early church. They think it's all like monolith. It's not a monolith. You have this weird liberal Roman church that's developing its own theology over there, and eventually that church will obtain political power, and then it will dominate, and they will enforce its own theology on the rest of Christianity, and it's going to pretty much force out all the other opposing voices. Okay.
What do you think made them like the spirit of Rome there? I mean, was it just because it was like there was a dense population, and so they felt like they were special because they had more people around? I mean, what's going on there?
Oh yeah, what happened is that in the early second century, you had so many Gnostics and so many anti-Jewish Christians. They all went to Rome, and there wasn't just one church in Rome. You have to understand, Rome has more than one church. Sure. It has hundreds of small churches all over the place. But you have some major churches start growing, and they become kind of mixture of Gnostic with mainstream Christianity. And so let me see if I'm actually discussing Marcion in this. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to come to the question. What happened with Rome? How did they, in the early 2nd century, become like a mutation? Where did that come from? Okay, let's go back, and we're going to come. Yeah, we're one page away from that answer. Well, let me skip Theophilus. Theophilus mentioned the 7-day Sabbath as a holy day. Actually, you know what? Let me not skip that. Okay. So, but the other Christians, especially in the East, they're still keeping the 7-day Sabbath. Now, we can see Polycarp, we can see Didache, and now we have, here's another one, Theophilus of Antioch. He's considered saint today by the Catholic and Orthodox Christians. While some Christian contemporaries of Theophilus from Alexandria and Rome argued in favor of replacing the Sabbath with Sunday, Theophilus of Antioch calls the 7-day Sabbath, he calls it, quote, a holy day appointed by God at creation, and, quote, acknowledged by all men, even the Gentiles. The Greeks actually adopted the 7-day cycle from the Jews, and they call Hebdomas the seventh, like a week cycle. And so he says even the Greek acknowledges 7-day Sabbath because they call it Hebdomas, like a week.
Oh, like some people say that Daniel's 70 weeks are heptameds or whatever. I've heard that. So sorry.
Right. He just said 70 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's 70 times 7 is 490. But you have so that's another topic.
Rabbit trail. Let's stay on focus. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, you're gonna get me into all kinds.
Sorry. Yeah. Go.
You can stay all night. Okay. So now let me show you Origen. Now this is interesting because Origen was like one of the main theologians of the 3rd century. He's one of the most known Christian translators. He wrote more than 60 books in the early church, and he was from Alexandria. But he wasn't just confined to Alexandria. He traveled all over the Roman Empire, and he was kind of like a good speaker. So he went to Asia Minor. He met with Sabbath keeping Christians in Asia Minor. Anyways, so Origen actually writes. He is from Alexandria, where you can see that there were traces of Sunday being pushed by Pseudo Barnabas. Origen actually rejected Pseudo Barnabas as a fake epistle, and he took a firm position that true Christians ought to rest from labor on the Sabbath. Here is a passage from Origen. Now, people really don't expect this from Origen because he's from Alexandria, and that's where supposedly Sunday originated. But he actually pounds on 7-day Sabbath. Look at this. This is a beautiful passage. And this is like, I would even put this passage on my shirt. Look what it says. It says, it is necessary that every saint and just person celebrate the feast of the Sabbath. Wow. Okay, moving on. Well, what is the feast of the Sabbath? If not that feast of which the apostle says, so a Sabbath, that is the observance of the Sabbath, Sabbatismo, will be left for the people of God. Wow. This is from Hebrew chapter 4, verse 8. Actually, Origen is using that text to say that the observance of the Sabbath should be left for the people of God, that it hasn't been replaced through that it wasn't part of the ceremonial system. And he said, therefore, leaving behind the Judaic observance of the Sabbath, let us see what sort of observation of the Sabbath there ought to be for the Christian. Okay, let me pause right here, because the Jews observed the Sabbath in a very legalistic way. I mean, they couldn't walk more than a mile. They couldn't, they couldn't turn on the lights.
Right.
They exaggerated it. I mean, you take a piece of grain and you try to open the pistachio. Oh, that's water.
This sounds like eerily similar to the quote of Ignatius to the Magnesians. Does that strike you at all?
Oh, that quote from Ignatius to Magnesians actually is a later quote. It's actually pseudo, but it's not really Ignatius.
Right, but it sounds like I've seen some translations of it where part of it sounds similar to this, or could be translated similarly to this too as well. And I know there's all sorts of sorry, keep going.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so let me finish this quote, and then I'm going to go into what you just mentioned. Okay. Ignatius is, because a lot of people go to Ignatius. Actually, this text that you're referring to was written 150 years after Ignatius, and it was added by some unknown author. It's called a long version of Ignatius, and it mentions Sabbath and it mentions Sunday, but it comes later. And actually, I have that in this document.
Oh, great.
It's just down in the text.
Great.
So what is Origen? Origen says, therefore, leaving behind the Judaic observance of the Sabbath, let us see what sort of observation of the Sabbath there ought to be for the Christian. And then he says, on the day of the Sabbath, no worldly activity is supposed to be carried out. Okay, I agree with that. No activity. Thus, if you cease doing secular works and carry out nothing worldly, that's even entertainment. I love this. But make room for spiritual works. If you come together at church, give ear to the divine readings and discussions. This is Sabbath school. Think about heavenly things, solicitous for the future, placing the judgment to come before your eyes, not looking to things present and visible, but to those which are future and visible. This is the observance of the Christian Sabbath. So don't look at your job. Don't look at your wallet. Don't think about material, worldly stuff, things present and visible, but focus on those things which are future and invisible. And so this is a day for spiritual nourishment, period.
Sounds like 2 Corinthians 5 a little bit there. It's like,
yeah.
I think I'm thinking the right verse there. Yeah.
The observance of Christian Sabbath. So to me, it was like, wait a second, didn't Origen get the memo? The church somehow, by osmosis, recognized that Sabbath was nailed on the cross, and now we have Sunday. And so Colossians chapter 2 verse 14 says that the shadows, the new moons, the circumcision, the festivals, the feasts, and the Sabbaths, which are the special Sabbath festivals of the Jews, they have been nailed on the cross. But this is talking about ceremonial. Everything has to do with ceremonies. The cross represented the death of the Lamb of Jesus. And so all these ceremonial statues were nailed on the cross. Some of the ceremonial statues were called Sabbaths because you're not supposed to work on some of these other days. But the 7-day Sabbath is in the 4th commandment. That has not been changed. Jesus said, when the tribulation comes, Matthew 24:20, in the end time, when the great tribulation comes, he said, pray that your flight might not be in winter or in the Sabbath or on the Sabbath. Because why would Jesus say that? Didn't Jesus get the memo? That's not important.
Or when they're taking him off the cross.
Yeah, like Jesus took it off from the cross somehow.
Yeah,
anyways,
they seem to want to observe it when they were, on Jesus' death even, which suggests to me he didn't even think to say anything about not observing it, because if they were going to not observe it, surely they wouldn't have worried about it while they're dealing with his body on the cross.
Right. We don't, nothing in the New Testament theology is talking about abolishing the 7-day Sabbath.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why you have Origen, one of the greatest this is the greatest 3rd century, maybe even of all time Christian theologians. And he is just like, no, we're not going to do the Judaic observance of the Sabbath, but we are going to do the real 7-day Sabbath celebration and keeping.
I've read a lot of it. I've read his works are, he's clearly brilliant.
Yeah, Origen. Okay. So he has some weird ideas.
Yeah, weird ideas though.
Some people debate on some other ideas that he had, but
right.
Anyways, he was pretty straight on the Sabbath. Now, it is true that the Jewish legalistic keeping of the Sabbath was an impediment to the Greeks, to the Gentiles. And when they would become Christian, they were like, well, how do we keep the Sabbath? So they sometimes didn't know how to really keep the Sabbath. So some of them just went into like non-keeping or just Sunday worship, and that's it. And so it's true, but there are many Christians who are like, no. You don't have to discard the entire 7. Jesus did not abolish the whole Sabbath. He just rebuked the Pharisaical abuses of the Sabbath. He says, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. Matthew chapter 2. Anyways, Mark chapter 2. So we can see that Origen distinguished between Judaic way of keeping the Sabbath, which Jesus himself opposed in the Gospels, and the proper way of keeping the Sabbath, which includes ceasing from labor and participation in spiritual activities. The testimony of Origen is significant, as he was the most influential Christian theologian of the 3rd century, and he didn't get the memo. So many other Christians probably shared his views on the 7-day Sabbath in Northern Africa, Palestine, Syria, and Asia Minor, where Origen is frequently invited to speak and teach. Now, the second most influential Christian writer of the 3rd century, Tertullian of Carthage, also confirmed the continued importance of the 7-day Sabbath. He didn't get the memo either, that the church somehow abolished the Sabbath by mentally, zap, Sabbath is gone. He didn't get the memo either. Influenced by the Latin Christian tradition, because he comes from Carthage, which was under the tutelage and jurisdiction of the Roman Church, Tertullian initially scorned the observance of the 7-day Sabbath. Yes, however, after becoming acquainted with more conservative Christian groups from Asia Minor, he changed his view and he began endorsing the Sabbath. He writes the following. Boom. This is from Tertullian against Marcion, book 4, chapter 12. He says, for Christ did not at all rescind the Sabbath. Amen. For even in the case before us, he fulfilled the law while interpreting its condition. Moreover, he exhibits in a clear light the different kinds of work while doing what the law allows from the sacredness of the Sabbath, and while imparting to the Sabbath day itself, which from the beginning had been consecrated by the benediction of the Father, an additional sanctity by his own beneficent action, for he furnished to this day divine safeguard. So he's saying, no, he fulfilled the law. He interpreted the condition of what he interpreted the Sabbath. Sabbath is for good works. It's for spiritual works. It's for, church works. And he says the Sabbath had been consecrated by the Father, and then additional sanctity by Jesus' own beneficent action.
And this is Tertullian?
This is Tertullian. He did not all rescind the Sabbath. That's what Tertullian said. Historian David Bratson confirms that Tertullian moved more and more towards the rigors of Sabbath keeping. His early answer to the Jews speaks of the Sabbath as having been a mere temporary provision. However, he asserts in his letter against Marcion, Christ did not at all rescind the Sabbath, and he did not utterly destroy it, which denies that Jesus annulled it, although Tertullian still maintained that the proper way of observing it to be different from rabbinic Judaism. Of course, we all believe this should be different from rabbinic Judaism. So he agrees with Origen right here. So two greatest early church scholars, Sabbath keepers.
Yeah, and it sounds like they're getting their chops from Jesus and Mark too, or whatever, right? I mean,
they sound like Seventh-day Adventists.
It's fascinating.
Okay. Now this statement, and Tertullian wrote this statement and other Sabbath-affirming statement in his famous treatise against Marcion. Who was Marcion? Marcion was the greatest heretic of the 2nd century, who hated all things Jewish, and he had a large following. Guess where?
Rome.
Roma.
Roma.
Large following in Rome. And so you can read that. And so about the middle of the 2nd century, Marcion traveled to Rome, where he joined the Syrian Gnostic Cerido. Hey, Marcion was a Gnostic. What a surprise.
He had a lot of money, right?
Yeah, Marcion notoriously wrote the following about the 7-day Sabbath. He says, quote, since that day is the rest of the God of the Jews, who made the world and rested the 7th day, we therefore fast on that day, that we may not do anything in compliance with the God of the Jews. So now you know who infiltrated the church in Rome. Marcion came with all of his hundreds of his crazy disciples, and they just started infiltrating the churches in Rome until Roman church just totally rejected, and they hated Judaism, and they kind of made a compromise, and they rejected the 7-day Sabbath. Despite being denounced as a heretic by the Roman Church, eventually Marcion wielded significant influence within Rome during the mid-2nd century. His students and views infiltrated the Roman Church, and eventually half a century later, guess what? The Roman bishops themselves began imposing the what? The Sabbath fast. Okay, this is why they would impose the Sabbath fast. Sabbath fast ordinance inducted by the Church of Rome opposed the established Christian practice of fasting on what day?
Preparation.
Friday, as outlined in the Didache, chapter 8. So who is departing from the tradition? I thought Catholic Church was all about tradition. Well, here's the scriptural tradition, and then here is even church tradition in Didache. Didache is the very first church manual. So they're totally departing from church manual, saying we should fast on the Sabbath. Why? Because the Sabbath fast rendered Christians unable to participate in the communion meal, precluding the observance of church services on the Sabbath.
Oh.
Back in the day, they would have communion every Sabbath because it was part of like a potluck. So they would have a meal, and then before the meal, they would break the bread, lift up the wine, remember Jesus' sacrifice, and on those, and then they would eat the bread, drink the cup if they accept Christ's sacrifice, and then they had fellowship meal. That was part of the. This is part of the Jewish Christian tradition. Now,
so the fast renders the people not to take part in the communion service. Then, if there's a fast,
communion or there's no meal. If there's no meal, there's no get together. When people get together, always there's food in the early church. Okay, so there's no congregation.
Wow.
On Sabbath. That's it. There's no food. Even if you get together, you can't do communion. So might as well you can't do congregation.
Wow.
And so they introduced Sabbath fasting, and this was opposed by Tertullian. He wrote against this. Also Hippolytus. And so many different early Christians were just totally blasting the church in Rome for going crazy on this issue. Anyway, Tertullian, and especially noted the Christian writer Hippolytus, opposed this trend of fasting. This is Tertullian on fasting, chapter 14, against Marcion, chapter 4. Before his conversion to Montanism, as Tertullian mentioned, there's a strong division within Christians in the fasting issue during Sabbath and kneeling during prayer. Anyways, so Hippolytus, who notoriously opposed Roman bishops, asserted that fasting, look at this, Hippolytus, he is probably the third most influential theologian of the early church. So you have Origen, Tertullian, Hippolytus. Hippolytus asserted that fasting on the 7-day Sabbath, he says, goes against, quote, the gospel. He writes, quote, even today, some allow themselves the same audacities. They order fasting on the Sabbath, of which Christ has not spoken, dishonoring even the gospel of Christ. So Hippolytus connected this with the gospel. Why? For Hippolytus, fasting on the Sabbath was not only against established Christian practice, but it represented a distortion and dishonor of the salvific message of the gospel. So he connected the Sabbath worship with the gospel of Christ. And so the gospel of Christ is Jesus died on Friday. He rested on the Sabbath. We rest with Jesus from our works. And we come on Sabbath following the gospel. The gospel is Christ dying for us. And now we don't have to get saved by our own works. And Sabbath embodies that. You come to church and you don't work for your provision to stay alive in this world. You rest on Christ. And so this is part of the gospel, because the day commemorates creation, and Sabbath should be seen as a joyous festival, day of rest, and church services, Holy Communion, and also it represents redemption, where we rest from our works. And so Hippolytus understood that the Sabbath was a experience of the gospel of Christ. This is crazy, because so many Christians today in the evangelical world says, "Wait, I want the gospel, but the Sabbath screams the gospel."
Amen.
Amen. And even in Hebrews chapter 4, if you go to Hebrews chapter 4, it talks about how we should keep the Sabbath in Hebrews chapter 4, how remains therefore a Sabbath keeping for the people of God. And it actually connects it with the gospel. It says here, let us, it says, for he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works as God did from his. So if we enter into he says, there remains therefore a rest, and the word rest is sabbatismos, which is a Sabbath keeping.
Yes.
Sabbatismos means Sabbath keeping. There remains a Sabbath keeping for the people of God. For he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works as God did from his. Because when God ceased from working on the 7th day, and then we mimic God
Yes.
We cease from our own works, from our physical works and from our spiritual works. We cease. We say, without, you're mimicking God, and that's why it needs to remain a rest for the people of God. So
yeah, and lots of translations reflect that in the translation. Rest isn't seen there in the English as well, and and we cease as God did, the way he did. That doesn't mean you don't work ever. It's in the way God did, and it talks about it as a Sabbath rest. It's not, you have to allegorize it in your mind when it's not speaking allegorically there, it seems to me.
Yeah, it remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. As English Standard Version, a Sabbath rest, Berean Sabbath rest, King James rest, whatever.
Right.
Sabbath rest. And so what's the Greek? The Greek original, you click on the Greek, boom. It says, so then remains a Sabbatismos. Sabbatismos is sabbatizing. It's sabbatizing,
Yeah.
They remain there for sabbatizing for the people of God. Because Sabbath is an experience of letting God work for you instead of you working. And that is exactly what the gospel is all about. And so Hippolytus gets it. He said, what? You're denying, church service and you're denying Sabbath. You're reducing the Sabbath so people don't come to church, and obviously there's going to be no no Sabbath worship, no congregation. They didn't really believe in Sabbath being the rest. You're reducing the gospel of Christ. And so Hippolytus, so Tertullian, Origen, and Hippolytus were not the sole defenders of the 7th day Sabbath in the 3rd century AD. The Christian observance of the Sabbath was actually more common in the eastern part. Hippolytus is actually from the west, by the way. Hippolytus is from the west. Tertullian is from the west. Origen is from the south, which is Alexandria. But so these are not even the Eastern Christians. The Christian observance of the Sabbath was most prominent in the East. Okay, here it is. While frequently misinterpreted as evidence for early Sunday reverence, the expanded version of Ignatius's letter to the Magnesians, which was actually edited and enlarged in 275 AD, and Ignatius actually lived in 110 AD. But this expanded letter to the Magnesians was actually edited in 275 AD, so it's not an early. Includes a paragraph affirming the observance of the Sabbath, specifically for engaging in spiritual contemplation. And so he says, this is not the original Ignatius's letter of Magnesians, but this is like a later edited, expanded version from the late third.
There's 3 different versions, right? Like what do they call it, Rescendence, or the medium and long or something. Is that right?
I only knew of 2. There's a shorter version and the later version. Maybe the later version has 2 different editors.
Okay, yeah, probably.
This is what the text said. This is the latest editing. So this is not Ignatius. Again, if you're watching this is not the early Ignatius from the 110 AD. This is like late 3rd century, but it shows us what the editor of the Ignatius's letter believes. Okay, so it says, let us therefore no longer keep the Sabbath after the Jewish manner. Okay, everybody agrees on that. But let everyone keep the Sabbath after a spiritual manner. So how do you keep it? You rejoice in meditation on the law, not in relaxation of the body, admiring the workmanship of God. Now, when he says not in relaxation of the body, he's probably trying to saying like the Jewish manner, and they would just not do anything. They wouldn't move on the Sabbath, like they wouldn't walk more than like 300 yards. And so,
or forbidding acts of charity and stuff that Jesus said was okay to do, right?
Right, and they would even forbid the acts of charity. Yeah, exactly. And so the extended version of the letter of Ignatius testifies that in 3rd century Asia Minor, Christians actually kept the Sabbath, because it says one should keep not Sunday, should keep not Monday, but should keep the Sabbath after spiritual manner. And so on that day, you rejoice in meditation on the law, and you're not doing what the Jews are doing in total, not not even walking, relaxation of the body, and you should be admiring the workmanship of God, focusing on the creation, because God created everything on the Sabbath. So admiring the workmanship of God. So the proper Christians keep the Sabbath, but not after the Jewish manner. The proper way of observance of the Sabbath was to spend time in spiritual activities, admiring the workmanship of God, but not the relaxation of the body, which is probably referring to the rabbinic restrictions on Sabbath bodily activities. We know that because he just said that in the context.
Yeah, and it sounds similar to what Origen was saying, like that you quoted that there. I like that.
Right. Yeah. So just like in the New Testament, instances of Jesus disregarding Pharisaic legalistic interpretation by plucking wheat to eat on the Sabbath, and so the Pharisees saw this as work. For Christianity, such simple activity. No, so the Jews would have to not even do that. So total relaxation of the body, meaning not using of the body. I think the word relaxation here is kind of like the translation could be maybe better.
Yeah.
Maybe we should look at maybe in kind of like
laziness,
non-contraction of the body. I have to look at the original Greek there to exactly. Okay, and so this is the long. This is the longer version. This is not the original version. And so in this long version, it says also, and then after the observance, you see, there's observance of the Sabbath. Let every friend of Christ keep the Lord's Day as a festival too. And so that is the later. See, this is not the early. This is not 110 AD. This is later in the late 3rd century. We don't have that in Origen. We don't have that in Tertullian. We don't have that in Hippolytus. We don't have that in Polycarp. We don't have that in Didache. This is just now. There's this compromise in this later editor of the Ignatius's letter to Magnesians. In this long edition of Ignatius' letter to Magnesians shows the practice of Christians to celebrate both Sabbath and Sunday. Well, he doesn't say that you observe. It says after the observance of the Sabbath, let every friend of Christ keep the Lord's Day as a festival. And so we don't know what that means. Does it mean also no work? Or does it mean just like a joyous occasion? You come to church, and that's fine. You can keep Lord's Day as a festival. You can kind of, if you want to remember Jesus' resurrection every Sunday, you come to church. You can come to church, but it's not a day of observance, like a rest where you don't work. You cease from your secular labor, your money-making labor, and whatever.
But
so,
have you heard of? I've heard of people contending over. I think it was if Lightfoot was the translator, and that one of his translations are questionable. Like it doesn't even say the Lord's Day; it says like the Lord's life or something.
That's something else. Oh yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. That's in the early 2nd century. I actually have that in my footnote here. This is such a here. Footnote number 13. It says like this: several writings from the first part of the 2nd century have been believed to mention the Sabbath being superseded by the Lord's Day or Sunday. Number 1, the letter of Pliny to Trajan describes that the Christians were meeting, quote, on a certain day before sunrise, perhaps to avoid persecution and enable work during daylight. We don't know. Still, we don't know what that means on a certain day before sunrise. Still, unfortunately, Pliny does not tell us which day the Christians met or whether it was weekly. Well, guess what? The Catholic theologians will tell you it was Sunday, even though it doesn't even say S, let alone U, or even N, or even D, but it's Sunday, not D, because they must be.
It must be.
It must be. It's like my child. She said, I want to have, and it's gonna be that way. It's not in the text. You can't make it up. Okay, so stop making things up. Let's go to number 2. Ignatius's letter to the Trallians. Verse 9, again, is a part of the long version of that letter, which scholars discount as unauthentic. It was lengthened much later. You can everything I wrote here, I'm giving you references, and you can just check it on Google, online, whatever. The shorter version, whose authenticity is widely accepted, says nothing about the Lord's Day or Sunday or anything like that. So letter to Trallians It's a later editing. When you later edit someone else's work, you're a plagiarist. When you edit someone else's work to say something that that person hasn't said, and that means you are actually it's a fraud.
It's a fraud. Or you could even, it's worse. It's not just an interpolation. It's
if you're a Roman Catholic, don't use frauds. I mean, if you want to use frauds and boast about it, I don't think it's going to help your moral cause. All right, let's move on. Number 3. In Ignatius's letter to the Magnesians, like in the Didache, there is a Greek term, kuriaken, which just means according to the Lord. There is no day, there is no Sunday. It's just term kuriaken, which would be better translated as Lord's something, Lord's way, or combined with the Greek word that follows it, maybe zontes, which is Lord's way of life, or Lord's living. Zontes means life. See the Didache translate, okay? So it says that we should follow, like it talks about it in Didache. It talks about how we shouldn't Judaize, but we should do Lord's way of life.
Yep.
This is, to me, a confirmation of the 7-day Sabbath, because Jesus didn't Judaize the Sabbath. He didn't respect Pharisaic legalistic observances, but he still, according to his custom, went to the synagogue on Sabbath, and he rested on the Sabbath, but he did not. Not make Sabbath fanatical. And
that's amazing. Have you published this?
No,
I've
not published yet.
This is awesome, man. Like, because when you look at what Origen said, and then you look at the things he says in the letter to the Magnesians, and you compare it, and you see what they're saying, and then you see that there's this longer version.
We are not Judaizing on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
We are keeping the Sabbath in a proper way.
It's awesome.
So don't Judaize, but do it in the Lord's way. And then that means you don't abolish the Sabbath. You do it in a proper way, just like the Lord did. The act of healing and the act of spiritual work, no physical work.
They're getting their ideas from the text, what Jesus taught in his word.
Right. So there is no now. So this footnote is super important, because a lot of people don't know this, and they are, there's this fake apology. There's apologists of Sunday on internet. They say, oh, the letter of Pliny, Ignatius' letter to Trallians. Oh, here it says kuriaken, which means kuriak emera. They add the word emera. There's not in the text.
Not there.
It's not talking about it's Lord's Day, and even if it says Lord's Day, it still doesn't mean it's Sunday. Lord's Day was the day of the Lord in Isaiah chapter 58 is Sabbath, and Jesus called himself Lord of Sabbath. He didn't say I'm Lord of Tuesday. He didn't call Tuesday or Monday or Wednesday Lord's Day. And so the Lord's Day was always Sabbath. So even if it said Kuriake Emera, this still would improve Sunday.
Yeah.
But it doesn't even say that.
It doesn't even say it. But
yes. Just but live in the Lord's way, not Lord's Day. Lord's way.
Yeah. It's like, even if it does say that, it's still not undermining the Sabbath. But it's not saying that. Even if it did, though. Oh, yeah, I love that. That's it's on point.
Anyways, so now you're seeing the whole picture. You're not just cherry picking. You're not just like, hey, look, there is Justin Martyr from Rome. Of course, Justin Martyr was influenced by Marcion. Or look, there is a Barnabas, pseudo-Barnabas from Alexandria. There's also very much Gnostic influence. You have those two, yes. There is Sunday mushrooming, yes. But look at the whole picture. Look at all the other mainstream church theologians of the time. They're saying Jesus did not rescind the Sabbath.
Yeah, there's clearly development, and they're clearly saying things, and they're getting it from what Jesus taught. And it's, so you can't, clearly then to go into the text to try to make it pretend as though the Sabbath is changed in the text is absolutely outrageous.
Amen, and amen. So, okay, yeah. So there are some texts, in Gnostic literature that calls Sunday the Lord's Day, and you can see the Gnostics pushing for Sunday, and then you can see that Bishop of Rome really kind of adopted that, and they even start changing the fasting ordinances and all that stuff. But you can see that these are the changes from the established norm. And actually, there is a late third century anonymous writing, which was called the Acts of John in Rome. It's just like a story about John, which is it's not written by John. It was written by later Christians who are claiming some people claim to remember what John was doing. So it's a document. It's an anonymous third century document, and it actually mentions the seventh-day Sabbath as still binding for Christians, calling it the Lord's Day.
Wow, I never heard of that.
This is late third century, but this eventually became the term used by Latin Christians to refer to Sunday.
Fascinating.
But in the third century, there's at least this document still calls Sabbath the Lord's Day. Now,
so people had that in their mind. It just shows that it was an idea that existed, at least.
And on the seventh day, it being the Lord's Day, John said to them, "Now it's time for me also to partake of food." So no fasting.
Yeah.
The Lord's Day, John said to them, "Now it's time to partake of food." Now this document is kind of a little bit like a fabulistic. It's like a story of John. We don't know if it's true or not. It's just like an early church. Maybe invented. We don't know, but that's not the point. The point is that you can kind of see what this author thinks. What the Lord's Day is. Lord's Day is still referred. 7-day Sabbath is still referred to as the Lord's Day, as late as the third century.
Yes, we don't need to pretend. We don't have to pretend like the others do about. Yeah.
Right. Now, so I'm showing you the third century. This is we're still in the third century. In the third century, now we can go outside of the borders of the Roman Empire. Let's go see it there because they're even more conservative. Look at this. In the east, outside the Roman Empire's borders, there are several indications that Christian Sabbath keeping was very common, actually prevalent among the Syrian and Assyrian churches. Here is one witness, Archelaus, Bishop of Haran, which is in Turkey today, but back in the day, was just on the borders of the Roman Empire, outside in Syria. And his acts of disputation with the heresiarch Manes, written around 270 AD, he opposes the idea promulgated by Gnostics and the Roman Christians that Jesus abolished the 7-day Sabbath. He actually writes, he states, quote, "Again, as to the assertion that the Sabbath had been abolished, we deny that he has abolished it plainly, for he was himself also Lord of the Sabbath." So here's another powerful statement from another very known Christian leader, but this one is outside of the Roman Empire border. In another writing, Archelaus explains, "It is fitting for whoever is righteous among the saints to also keep the festival of the Sabbath, for there remains therefore a Sabbatismus, that is a keeping of the Sabbath to the people of God." This guy didn't get the memo either.
Yeah.
So basically, we deny the Darth Vader in Rome, and we follow the true what early church, Didache, Polycarp. We're following, and we're just keeping the Sabbath in the proper way.
No, they just read it for what it says in the original language there, it looks like. I mean, they're just asserting what the scriptures tell us.
We have Epaphras from Mosul. He also approved the practice of Sabbath keeping, but not to gain salvation. I'm going to skip him. He concludes that Christians should keep the Sabbath for rest, but the Sabbath observance itself saves no one. Yes, we agree with that. Then besides these mainstream Christian groups and leaders who continue to witness the proper Sabbath observance, there were also branches of Judaistic Christians called Nazarenes and Ebionites who maintained the strict observance of the seventh day. They're mentioned by Irenaeus, Eusebius, Epiphanius, and so on and so on. So Sabbath keeping remained not just among the Christians in the Roman Empire, East and West. You can see in the 3rd century. You can see it also outside of the Roman Empire, and you can even see it by some little bit Judaistic Christian. There are some Judaistic Christians who are still holding on to circumcision and whatnot. They are also observe the Sabbath. So Sabbath has actually been a majority view in different Christian groups, and it's only the minority liberal Western Rome that started pushing for Sunday.
And like you showed, even among them, there's those who are pushing back. I have friends that identify as Nazarenes actually still, and so, however authentic that is.
Nazarene was an early Christian group. They downplayed Jesus' divinity somehow, but today, when you say Nazarenes, today those are Methodists. Not this movement. They're not the same Nazarenes as this early Judaic Christian movement called Nazarenes. Anyhow, so how did we get Sunday then? How did Sunday prevail? If Sunday was not the dominant view, but it was a rival view, how did it prevail? Okay, so what is footnote saying? Okay, so in an effort to reconcile different Christian practices and to enhance the appeal of Christianity to his pagan subjects, Emperor Constantine pursued a policy of endorsing Roman Christian rituals and beliefs. These were deemed to bear the closest resemblance to Greek philosophical thought and certain Roman customs, thereby facilitating a smoother integration of Christianity within the broader cultural context of the Roman Empire. So this was a political move, and Constantine actually showed his preference for the Roman Christianity in different ways. For example, I have a footnote here. Constantine, he attacked Donatist Christians in northern Africa at the instigation of the Roman Bishop Sylvester I. So in several instances, you can see that Constantine favored the Roman Christianity, because that's where he learned. He learned about the Christianity from Roman Christians, and then he embraced Christianity, which was Roman brand of Christianity, and then he realized that Christianity doesn't agree. Like there are differences, there are rifts between West and East, and then he was like, "What are we gonna do? How can we unite? And which Christianity do I want to favor so that the pagan subjects can become more easily Christian?" Well, guess which one? The one that sounds more pagan. And so he started pushing for the Sunday rest. And so, following numerous endeavors to suppress opposition to the authority of the Bishop of Rome, including the persecution of the Donatists in North Africa, Constantine ultimately issued a decree in AD 321 endorsing the Roman tradition of observing Sunday as a day of rest and worship. Now, he did not endorse Sabbath fast. He only pushed for like, okay, when are we going to go to church? So he wanted to have day free, day off. And also in AD 321, you have to understand that in AD 321, Constantine is still not the emperor of the entire Roman Empire. He is only the emperor of the West. Okay, so in the West, he made a decree that Sunday should be a day of rest on worship. So he did not know because there was a Western Roman Emperor and the Eastern Roman Emperor. And so Licinius was the Eastern Roman Emperor. And so Constantine, he was in the West. He learned Christianity from the Roman bishops. And so he tried to integrate the pagans into Christian churches. And so guess what? He just told everybody to stop working on Sunday, hoping that people can now go to the Christian churches, which he started building Christian churches. So that's what Constantine really wanted to do. And then
to kind of hold the empire together.
Yeah, but he was really just working
in
for
the
the
West.
Western Roman Empire. He wasn't even the emperor of the East. The East, everybody was more Sabbath keeper in the Eastern Roman Empire. So and I'm going to show that later. We're going to see that the Eastern bishops, they start opposing Sunday. In the decree, Constantine forbade any work on the venerable day of the sun. So that's how he calls Sunday, venerable day.
And that's at the Council of Laodicea or something?
No. This was before Council of Laodicea.
Okay.
Council of Laodicea is the next step.
Okay.
It's in the east. You see, Council of Laodicea is the next step. So for right now, he is just making, he is issued a decree. And so although this decree was initially only binding in the western part of the Roman Empire, it became effective in the east after Constantine defeated Licinius in AD 326. So it just kind of automatically, Constantine becomes the emperor of the both east and west. And so now this decree binds even in the east. So what are the people going to do in the east? Well, you know what they did? They follow the orders. They follow the orders in this way. They say, hey, we keep the Sabbath. we rest on the Sabbath. But now the emperor says we have to rest on Sunday. Well, we're just going to have a weekend. We're going to have 2 days of rest. And so they started doing that. They started having both Sabbath and Sunday in the east, and in the west, they only had Sunday. So Eusebius, bishop of Caesarea and one of Constantine's most loyal supporters, reports that the emperor officially prescribed a marked change and introduced it to many churches. He writes, quote, all things whatsoever that it was the duty to do on the Sabbath, these we have transferred to the Lord's Day Sunday. So you see, this is not Jesus who transferred. This is not even the early apostles who transferred. This is not the early second century church who transferred. This was really during the time of Constantine. He says it so Eusebius says it, all things whatsoever that it was the duty to do on the Sabbath, these we have transferred to Sunday. And so
what would you say? What can I ask? What would you say to someone who says, you Adventists don't know what you're talking about? People were keeping Sunday before Constantine changed. He didn't change it. There were people doing it before. Therefore, you shouldn't say Constantine changed it. What would you say in response to that?
Yeah, sure. Some heretical churches like Rome, they did keep it, and that's why Constantine was influenced by those churches. And so, but you have clear evidence that I just provided to you that majority of the churches in the East, where actually 70% of Christians were in the East, they were still Sabbath keepers inside of the borders of the Roman Empire, outside of the borders of the Roman Empire, and even ultra-conservative Christians were also Sabbath keepers. So
you need a day of rest because you need a day to gather. And it's like, so it's not like, because somebody in my chat is saying we're Sabbath idolatry is a sin. And I'm thinking, well, look, you either do what Jesus, follow after Jesus, or you don't, and you have to gather and do communion, or, so you have to have a day to gather. So it's like no one was thinking, oh, we shouldn't have a day to gather on. So it's like, well, are you going to go with Jesus, or are you going to go with something somebody made up that goes against what Jesus taught? That's my claim.
So what's going to happen? Yes. Before Constantine, the Latin Christians, they had Sabbath fast and they had Sunday keeping. Yes, but that was not the observance of the majority of the Christians, which was in the East. Number one. Number two, because Constantine was the emperor in the West, when Constantine defeated Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, he went straight to the Senate. He didn't go to Jupiter's temple to offer incense to Jupiter. He went to the Senate asking to find Christian leaders because he wanted to learn Christianity, because he had a dream about the Christian God and had a dream of the cross. And so he wanted to learn more about this cross and in which sign he was to conquer. And so, according to the narrative that we know. And so, Constantine, they bring to him Sylvester I, who was a notorious Sunday keeper and opposer of the Sabbath. And so they bring to him Sylvester the First, who, he was the teacher and the mentor to Constantine. And then Constantine begins enforcing Roman Christianity. For example, he attacked the Donatist Christians in Northern Africa. Because why? Because the Roman Christians hated the Donatist Christians, so Constantine hates them too. He attacked them. Later, he apologized for killing a bunch of them, but whatever. That's a bare apology. And so you can see that Constantine kind of drank the Kool-Aid from the Roman Bishop Sylvester, and then the Roman Christians they venerate and they rest on the Sunday. So what is Constantine going to do? Well, he is the ruler of the Western Roman Empire, and so all the Christians here are mostly Sunday keepers, except maybe in the British Isles. And also in northern Italy, there were Sabbath keepers, and there were Sabbath keepers a lot interspersed in the West as well, and more later, but mostly Sunday keepers in the West. And so he just says, hey, we're going to have a day off on the Sunday. He's not even thinking about offending anyone. We're going to day off, and so the pagans can have day off too, and then that's when they don't work, hopefully they can go to church. He's trying to convert as many as possible. But then he becomes the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire. And once he becomes the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, the decree is now the whole Roman Empire has the same decree, the Sunday keeping. Now you have to understand that only 20% of the people lived in the cities, and this decree was only limited to the urban areas. And people in the villages, they could still work on Sunday if they wanted to plow their fields, to work with the animals, because that was part of the decree, actually. The decree said that you can work on the fields, and because of the rain seasons, and then you have to plan certain things according to the moon and according to the seasons. You can't wait for another day. If you have to plant on Sunday, you can plant on Sunday, you can harvest, blah, blah, blah. So he allowed work on Sunday for 80% of the people, but only the urban areas had to close on Sunday. So what are you going to do in the East? People just, it was obligation. It was the law. So Christians, they just closed their shops on Sunday, but they kept the 7-day Sabbath. That's the interesting thing. So now this is important because these Christians did not get the memo either. That the Sabbath was abolished. So I wonder at what point are all these early church fathers and all these Catholic saints, at what point will they get it? So
yeah.
So look, as a result, Sabbath observance persisted in regions such as Asia Minor and Syria, coexisting with the compulsory rest on Sunday mandated by constant decree. Now, countering this practice of continual Sabbath keeping, there was a local synod composed of around 30 Christian leaders from Phrygia and the surrounding area, and they convened in Laodicea, which is always the most lukewarm church, so no wonder. And the surrounding convened in Laodicea in an attempt to root out the practice of Sabbath rest in their area. Obviously, there's still Sabbath rest, but they're trying to root it out. And so forcing Christians to work on the 7-day Sabbath. Now, this is unprecedented. This is a Christian council. Canon 29 of the Laodicean Synod decision states, quote, Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath. So simple resting is now Judaizing. But they must work on that day.
Works-based salvation.
Yeah, they must work on that day, rather honoring the Lord's Day, and if they can, resting then as Christians on the Lord's Day. If any shall be found to be Judaizers, let them be anathema for Christ. Whoa, this fellowship, anathema. Okay.
That sounds like works-based salvation.
Of course it is. Of course it is. Other canons reveal gross anti-Semitism. Canon 37 says, it is not lawful to receive portions sent from the feast of Jews or heretics, nor to feast together with the Jews. Canon 38 says it's not lawful to receive bread from the Jews, and so on. So it's kind of like you can't even, like, they really hate the Jews. Like, you can't even eat their food. So they really hated the Sabbath because he really was kind of Jewish. But the Council of Laodicea was defeated. He was defeated. Look at this. This regional synod decision, which only 30 people assembled for this decision, just to give you a comparison, Council of Nicaea had more than 300 Christian bishops all over the empire. This one was 130, so 110.
When was that? When was the Nicaea?
325.
So not too much earlier then.
Yeah, about 35 years
Okay.
later. Nicaea did not discuss Sabbath or Sunday issue. Okay. They discussed the divinity of Christ because that's another topic. Okay, but this regional synod decision. Now, a lot of people, like if you go to Catholic apologists, they're gonna lift up this council. They're like, yeah, like as if this was a general council. No, it wasn't. This was a regional synod decision of 30 like-minded bishops, and it countered reactions from many bishops in Asia Minor and Syria. Halala, Gregory of Nyssa, he is the greatest 4th century theologian in the East. He attacked the exaltation of Sunday at the expense of the Sabbath. He says, with what eyes can you behold Sunday if you desecrate the Sabbath? Don't you know that these days are brethren? He who elevates one disregards the other. So he's saying, so he's kind of adopting this idea of both Sabbath. You can see Sabbath and Sunday. Now we're going into the period because people are having both Sabbath and Sunday. Here it is, another one. Marcellus, Bishop of Ancyra, in 374 in Central Asia Minor, likewise argued against the Canon 29 of the Council of Laodicea that many Christians keep the Sabbath rest, not because they're infected with Judaism, quote, but to worship Jesus, the Lord of the Sabbath. This is from Marcellus, Bishop of Ancyra. And then there's Asterius, Bishop of Amasea in Pontus. This is also Asia Minor. This is north of Laodicea. He wrote the following. It is beautiful to Christians and the industrious that the theme of these 2 days comes together. I speak of the Sabbath and the Lord's Day, which time in its course brings around weekly. For as mothers and nurses of the church, they gather the people, set over them priests and instructors, and lead both disciples and teachers to have a care for souls. So again, he's saying the theme of these 2 days comes together, Sabbath and the Lord's Day. So he's kind of elevating, don't forget the Sabbath. That's what he's saying. Another one, in response to the attempts of Sabbath suppression, but mainly out of concern for the preservation of apostolic practices in Eastern Christianity, some bishops in Eastern Asia Minor, probably from Antioch, crafted an essential early document called, quote, the Apostolic Constitution. Now, this document is the foundation of the Orthodox Church today. This early document, which eventually became the basis of the Eastern Orthodox canon. Among other regulations, this document, written around 375 AD, admonishes a special observance of Sabbath rest, as well as Sunday, which was prescribed by Constantine. So this says, "O Lord Almighty," that this is from Constitution of Holy Apostles, Book 7:23. It says, "O Lord Almighty, Thou hast created the world by Christ, and hast appointed the Sabbath in memory thereof, because that day Thou hast made us what? Rest from our works. For what? For the meditation upon Thy law. Assemble yourselves every day." You can assemble yourself every day, morning and evening, but principally on the Sabbath day and on the day of our Lord's resurrection, which is the Lord's Day. Keep, you have to keep something. Keep the Sabbath and the Lord's Day festival, because the former is the memorial of creation and the latter of resurrection.
Wow.
So you can see, this is Constitution of Holy Apostles. Now, this is the church manual for all the Eastern churches.
Wow.
Boom.
Even today they use it, don't they?
Well, yes, this is the foundation of the Orthodox Church canons.
Wow.
They have this in their books as their church manual.
I like talking to Eastern Orthodox. I have some friends that are Eastern Orthodox, and I enjoy talking to them.
Yeah, I told them about this, and they tell me, yeah, even today we go to church on Saturday, and then we have a church on Sunday. Sunday we rest,
Yeah.
but Saturday is the church day. I'm like, no, it should be opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah, I said, no. According to your constitutions, you should rest
Yes.
on Saturday.
Yes. Yeah.
And
I'll have to ask them.
They're confused.
Yeah, I'll have to point that out to my friends.
Here's another one. This is from Book 8 of the Constitution of the Holy Apostles. Peter and Paul do make the following constitutions. Wow. Let the slaves or servants work 5 days, but on the Sabbath day and the Lord's day, let them have leisure to go to church for instruction in piety. We have said that the Sabbath is an account of the creation and the Lord's day of the resurrection. So here's another one. Okay. So anyways, you have that. And you can clearly say that they should make us rest and they should keep, and the servants should not work. But this goes directly against who? Against Council of Laodicea.
Yeah.
This goes directly against the Council of Laodicea, which says the Christians must not Judaize by resting, but they must work on that day.
Wow.
See that? Now, this is Nazi, right here. You must work. That's it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Where's the whip? Okay. So,
that's funny you say that, because I always tell people, I'm like, you say we shouldn't keep the Sabbath, and I'm works-based salvation because I say we should rest on the Sabbath. I guess, do you sleep at night? Do you take breaks at work? Because no, Jesus is your rest now. I thought, don't. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. That's awful.
Yeah. So basically, you see the context. You see a lot of people, like, they just bring out Council of Laodicea. Wait, that's just one voice. What are the other bishops saying? What is the church manual saying here? Okay. Yeah. You see, this is the opposition. Yeah. And so look, and now I'm going to close with this. Okay. Therefore, despite the efforts made towards Sunday elevation by Emperor Constantine and the Edict of Laodicea, Sabbath sacredness did not disappear. They didn't get the memo yet. It was specially preserved among many Eastern churches. The local Synod of Laodicea failed in rooting out Sabbath observance from the East, and the 5th century Greek historian Socrates Scholasticus, this guy's not even a Christian, he was able to observe the following, quote, and this is what Socrates Scholasticus writes, he said, for although almost all churches, what? All churches?
Wow.
Almost all churches throughout the world celebrate the sacred mysteries, which is the Lord's Supper, on the Sabbath of every week. Yet the Christians of Alexandria and Rome, on account of some ancient tradition, have ceased to do this. You see, who is in majority? This is the 5th century, guys.
Wow.
They still haven't gotten the memo until the 5th century that Sabbath was abolished. Okay, the Egyptians in the neighborhood of Alexandria and the inhabitants of Thebes, they do hold their religious assemblies on the Sabbath, but they do not participate of the mysteries in the manner usual among Christians in general, because the Roman Christians, they would fast on that day. They hated the Sabbath. See, the Roman Christians were not majority. Their teaching, their theology was not a majority custom. That is important to see. Here's another witness. It says the division in practices between the East and the West is also reported by another 5th century Greek historian, Sozomen. This is from 440 AD. It says people of Constantinople and almost everywhere assembled together on the Sabbath as well as on the first day of the week, which custom is never observed at Rome.
Wow.
Or at Alexandria. See, the Roman and Alexandria, black sheep, especially Rome.
That reminds me of I was reading a paper on that was talking about the dialogue from Bacchiocchi's work, and a lot of people seemed to reject one of his arguments about paganism entering in through Rome, and it seems like you're doing a good job of giving some foundation to that idea. With these things, a lot of people want to say, well, that's not possible because they're being persecuted and this and that. And it's like, actually, that sounds a lot more realistic if you ask me, when you look at this as a whole and you step back and look at everything.
Right. That's why it's important to see the whole picture, not just not just one or two puzzles, and then try to make a whole picture of just two puzzles. Okay, so now I'm going to stop here because I think we're getting the whole picture here. But the rest of my paper actually shows that the Sabbath keeping from the east started infiltrating the west in the 400s, 500s, and 600s through the barbarian tribe. Because I don't have time now to go to that, but well,
maybe we could continue it some other time when you have time.
We can wait and continue another time. In this paper, I am also discussing the Sabbath keeping among the Arians. Even the Arians, they were Sabbath keepers. Non-Trinitarian Christians, Trinitarian Christians, Eastern Christians, they're all. And then you had also the Greek missionaries. Now, the Greek missionaries in the East, obviously, they had Sabbath. In some of them, they had Sabbath and Sunday. Okay. Now, the Greek missionaries actually went to the German barbarians, and they converted a bunch of barbarian tribes. And then once the barbarian tribes became Christian, and they were kind of semi-Arian, anti-Trinitarian, and they were Sabbath keepers, then they conquered the Western Roman Empire. We know the Western Roman Empire crumbled because of the barbarians. These barbarians, Ostrogoths, Visigoths, Lombards, Vandals, they were all Sabbatarian.
Wow.
And so now you have, even in the West, the majority Sabbatarian. And then you have Celtic Christians who are Sabbatarian. Then you have Italian, North Italy Christians who are all Sabbath keepers. Ambrose of Milan was a Sabbath keeper. He would not fast on Sabbath, and then he comes into Rome to preach, and he's like, they don't give him food. So I was like, okay, on Sabbath, I do, when I come to Rome, I do like Romans, that Ambrose of Milan. So Sabbath was actually not dying, it was actually gaining ground in the 5th century, in the 6th century, and it was only when Justinian, the Byzantine emperor, when he joined with the Pope and he starts eradicating different heretical groups, he starts eradicating barbarian tribes, he starts eradicating any practices in Christianity that is not in accordance with the Roman bishop, and then Roman bishop gets political power, and then the Franks, they converted to Catholicism. And when Franks and Byzantines, when they started pushing for the Roman religion, not by the power of persuasion, but the power of the sword, that's when Catholic Christianity emerged as the Christianity. That's when, and then all the other Christian groups, they had to fade, they had to go to the wilderness, they had to go to hiding, and they had to go into the Alps, into the Syrian desert, Nestorian, into the Celtic islands. They had to kind of
flee into the wilderness because there was a dragon whose blood came out of his mouth or something almost.
Because the Roman Church finally got the sword. that happened starting in the 6th century, 538, when Justinian made a whole law persecuting Sabbath keepers. If we have time, I can show you the law of Justinian saying that you cannot keep the Sabbath at all. And this was a law. And so, anyways, so this came way later. This came in the 6th century. And so from 6th century on, you have the suppression of all of these movements that both kept the Sabbath, but not just kept the Sabbath. They didn't worship the saints, they didn't worship Mary, they didn't have idols and statues and images, and they worshiped God through conversion of the heart, not through the mechanical sacraments. So it was a completely different Christianity. And anyways, so we're gonna stop here, but I hope you can see the picture. This is a true picture of how the early church progressed and developed in growing, how Rome grew into developing error, but Sabbath was sticking around sticking around for 6 centuries strong, even against Gnostics, against the Roman Christians, against Constantine, against Council of Nicaea. It was still sticking strong until it was finally snuffed out. But not in the East, by the way. Actually, the Sabbath, oh man, I didn't even mention this. The Sabbath was the main issue. Why the Roman Christians and the Eastern Orthodox Church split in 1054. What's the year? 1054, Great Schism. Great Schism. I actually discussed this in my paper. If you just go further in 1054, one of the main issue was the Sabbath. Let me show you what the Roman bishop said about here. Look at this. This is in 1100. This is not even 600. This is 1100. It says the Greek patriarch and his counselors, offended by the arrogance of the papal legate, refused to give up their observance of the Sabbath. In response to this refusal of submission, Cardinal Humbert condemned the Church of the East during the Sabbath morning worship service, affixing the letter of excommunication to the altar of the Saint Sophia Basilica. These are his words in the letter he wrote. You Greeks, if you do not Judaize, tell us then why you have something in common with the Jews in a similar observance of the Sabbath. Wherefore, because you observe the Sabbath with the Jews, and with us you observe the Lord's Day, Sunday, you appear by such observance to imitate the sect of the Nazarenes, who in this manner accepts Christianity that they might not give up Judaism. Now, this is all totally false. Nazarenes never observed Sunday; they were only Sabbath keepers. And then it's false that the Greeks were observing Sabbath in a similar observance like the Jews. So everything is false what the papal legate said. But what the point is that this is the reason why the Western Church, this fellowship, the Eastern Church, the Orthodox, that's the reason why the Orthodox Church split from the Latin Church. This is one of the main reasons.
Wow.
In a letter to Patriarch of Antioch, Michael Cerularius, who is the Greek patriarch, a Greek theologian, he reported the recent happenings at Constantinople and explained why he had refused to yield to the demands of the papal legates. Concerning the matter of the Sabbath observance, he said, quote, for we are commanded also to honor the Sabbath equally with the Lord's Day and to keep it and not to work on it. Boom! So this attitude of the Greek Orthodoxy versus Sabbath keeping remained throughout the High Middle Ages. And so this is going to only later in the 12, 13, 1400, when the Latin Church actually conquered Constantinople in 1250, will Sabbath keeping will cease among the Orthodox churches.
Wow.
And so until 1200s, Sabbath keeping was still the main teaching of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and which was actually numerous, had many millions of followers and believers in the East, and they didn't get the memo. They still didn't get the memo 1,000 years after Jesus, that Jesus crucified himself. So we can clearly see this is an exception from the Latin little horn, papal horn, that wanted to change times and laws. That's what we clearly see from history.
Clearly. Wow.
We're done.
Wow. Well, so before we close it up, just like, what do you know? Who are you to know anything about this? What are your qualifications? Yeah.
I'm a PhD in church history.
And you've studied this a little bit.
I speak Latin, I can read Greek, I read Latin, Greek, Hebrew. I'm educated. This is my doctorate. I'm actually a doctor in medieval history.
Amen. Cool. Well, hopefully we can do this again. Well, I think you kind of did, but it didn't get caught. It didn't get on the recording, maybe.
Okay, good.
But thank you so much for giving me your time and all of us. And I'll be in touch with you. Do you mind closing us out with prayer?
Absolutely not. Okay, so let's pray. I'm going to send you this paper.
Oh, cool.
What we covered today is actually 1/3 of the evidence for Sabbath keeping. If you read the paper, you're going to see Orthodox Church, Russian Church kept the Sabbath, Bulgarian Church kept the Sabbath, Armenians in India, in China, Nestorian, Syrian. Actually, throughout the centuries, I think there's more Sabbath keepers.
Wow.
The Ethiopian church than Sunday. Like, we don't really have this perception because we're such a West-oriented, and for us, Europe is just like France. So you don't understand how much actually there was evidence throughout centuries of many people still holding on to the true day of the Lord, and even going later into the Protestant Reformation and so on and so on.
Yeah, before you pray, let me just mention to my audience or anybody watching this, if this is later, you're watching this later, look to the days previously when this was posted, the last few days. I posted some of Dr. Zivadinovic's work, so you can access through links on my channel that's public to access. And so do that. And thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Of course, Jamie. Thank you for having me. This is a little bit of a lengthy topic, but it takes time to see the whole picture.
Yeah.
All right, let's pray. Father in heaven, I just pray that you give us wisdom and love and light, that whoever is watching this, Lord, that they can see the truth in both Bible and in history. And so many Christians, they continued holding onto your holy law. And you said that the remnant church, Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, it says the church, the dragon was angry with the woman, and he went to find those who keep the commandments of God and have a faith and testimony of Jesus. And so, Father, Lord, this is the characteristic of truly God's church. They keep the commandments of God together with the testimony of Jesus. And so, Father, I pray that you take us out of Babylon churches that do not keep the commandments of God, Sabbath, and also who have idols and statues. And the Bible says, do not make any graven images, second commandment. So, Father, I pray that you take us away from the false aberrations in the church history, but you bring us to the true light of the true Reformation. And I pray that you send us your Holy Spirit so we can know the truth, and the truth shall set us free. We pray this in Jesus' name. We love you, Lord. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Z. I'll talk to you offline here in a minute.
Okay, Jamie. God bless you, and God bless everyone who's watching this. And next time we'll cover maybe the same topic, continue, or another topic.
Sounds great.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So if you missed the beginning, definitely go back and watch the whole thing. This is powerful and scholarly work from Dr. Z. As I said, I posted some of his work in my community page on my YouTube channel. Definitely check it out. And God bless.